So good afternoon and welcome to the Butler Gallery, and a warm welcome indeed from the Butler Gallery in Kilkenny to you all joining us for this afternoon's talk. My name is Alan Kerwin. I'm the Learning and Public Engagement Curator at the Gallery, and absolutely delighted that you can join us for the first of our talks that we have specifically programmed to accompany our current exhibition, Richard Mosse's Incoming, at Butler Gallery. The exhibition is very much based around what often is called a hot topic of migration, and has been for the past 10 to 15 years. And so the talks we've programmed really tie into that topic. And today's topic of conversation, the title is A Spotlight on Migration, the Role of Museums and Galleries. And the word spotlight chosen specifically because we at Butler Gallery are very aware of how museums and galleries are becoming more involved in social issues of the day and social activism and agency, and migration needs a spotlight, has to have a spotlight as much as the other issues that are dealt with. So we're delighted to be joined by Sophie Henderson, the director of the Migration Museum in the UK, and by Hina, artist and social commentary really, and based in Ireland. Sophie has really been at the helm of the Migration Museum since 2013 and has been bringing it on this journey to make it a permanent cultural resource and infrastructure in the United Kingdom. And I think we'll learn a lot and hear a lot about that today. Sophie also comes from a background as a barrister and immigration, a judge of immigration. So she really has insights into this domain and brings a lot of experience to the subject. Hina is an artist originally from Pakistan, but has been based in Ireland since 2015. She herself has experienced the direct provision centre system in Ireland, and having gone through that, has her own insights and views on this. And her work is very much connected to the experiences of immigration. So she looks at gender issues within that system and really the plight of people that get caught up in a system such as this. And she will talk more about that. The questions will be put to both our speakers today by the director of Butler Gallery, Anna O'Sullivan. And Anna, as many of you will know, actually curated Richard Mosse's initial Venice Biennale show in 2013, which was really world renowned at that time, in the feedback that it got, Enclave, which looked at a different situation, the militias and the violence in the DRC, the Democratic Republic of Congo, but in a similar fashion, using surveillance camera, infrared work. So a common theme moves from that into his current work, Incoming, which is the first time Incoming has been shown in Ireland at the Butler Gallery. So on that point, I will hand over to Anna and just say to you all, do please send in any questions, put them in the chat box or the Q&A, and I will come back at the end and I can put them to the speakers for you. So Anna, over to you.
Thank you, Alan, and welcome to Hina and Sophie. Delighted to have you here today. I guess just for audience sake, we are going to start off with Sophie giving a small presentation on the Migration Museum. We'll follow with a few questions, and then Hina will give us a small presentation of her work as well, and then we'll end with some more questions. So I'll hand over to you, Sophie, and look forward to learning more about the Migration Museum.
Lovely. Thank you very much, Anna, for having me. So I'm going to give you, I think it's going to be a pretty whistle-stop tour of the Migration Museum, but I've got a few slides and I thought I'd just explain, what it is that we're aspiring to do and what we've done so far. We've been going, as Alan says, for about 7 years, but I'm just going to share my screen and let's hope this works. How's that? Can you see that?
Yes.
So I need to... There. Okay. Can you see that?
Yes.
All right. So yes, we've been going. We're based in London, and we've been going for about 7 years. And our aspiration is to create a permanent migration museum for Britain. We think this is, there's a conspicuous gap in Britain's cultural landscape where such an institution really ought to be. And so this is our mission, to create a moving, inspiring institution to reflect the central role that migration has always played in our national story. And our vision, is of a society that owns and feels connected to our shared migration story as an essential part of British history. And actually all those words are needed because, lots of people kind of feel that they have a migration heritage because they arrived in this country or their parents or grandparents did. And that's, that's sort of a ready kind of way of them identifying themselves. Such people may not feel that that story is kind of front and center as a mainstream British story. Other people may feel very well represented in sort of national narratives, but not necessarily that their story is one of migration. And our challenge to those people is to say, well, look, you too, if you dig back into your family history, you are bound to have a story, either of immigration or of emigration somewhere in the past. So, for us, this is something that is, genuinely can feel, that can connect every last one of us. And what we want our museum to be, and indeed it already is a place where people can come together to reflect and explore and have more reasoned conversations about migration. These migration museums around the world, you can see number 18 is the Epic Centre in Dublin, which sadly I haven't visited, although we have lots of contact, I think, with that museum. But you can see in Britain, there's a glaring gap for this kind of global country with its global history. There really ought to be a migration museum. We're behind the curve. And a brief overview of just the things that we do. We put on exhibitions, multimedia exhibitions, exploring a range of kind of migration stories, from a variety of angles. We put on events and workshops, a very wide range of events, from football competitions to comedy nights to discussions to annual lectures to dance, you name it. There is a really kind of, well, obviously not now during COVID times, but in normal times, a really kind of lively program of events that go alongside our exhibitions. We have an education program. We convene something called a migration network, which is a sector supporting network aiming to bring together institutions around the country that want to bring out migration stories within their own institutions so that they can share best practice and kind of learn from each other. So that's just a kind of enabling role that we play. And we do lots of other public engagement as well. Currently, and this is really exciting, we haven't got our permanent home yet. I think we'll get one, but we are based in the middle of a really busy shopping centre in southeast London. And between those two bits of the Berlin Wall, you can see the entrance to our museum, which is in a former H&M store. It's huge and it's actually beautiful. It's a really busy shopping centre. 14 million people go through it each year. They did pre-COVID. So these two bits of the Berlin Wall have been loaned to us by the artist Stick, who painted the figure on the right. And an artist called Thierry Noir painted the figure on the left. And I just think this is a very sort of fitting emblem, really, for our migration museum, that here are two people, in an era when walls are actually going up. These two people, they don't really look like each other, but they're just talking to each other, I think, about what they've got in common and kind of, bridging a divide. So it's an exciting work of art for us to have. And it's actually, it's pretty novel for shoppers to, sometimes literally bump into bits of the Berlin Wall in the middle of a shopping centre. So we love that. Now, at the moment, we've got two main exhibitions. One is about emigration, because, people often miss this. All the noise and all the talk is always about immigration. But actually, the bigger picture, in some ways, is the story of people who've left. Ever since the sailing of the Mayflower in 1620, millions of people have left. And, some people say that there are maybe 100 million people around the world now with British ancestry. It's a huge story. And until the middle of the 1980s, Britain was a net exporter of people. That's not that long ago. And what's interesting is that the motivations that people have had for leaving the country are, very similar, as you perhaps might expect, to the motivations that make people come to the country today. So it's these are two sides of the same coin: immigration and immigration. And it's an interesting way of considering contemporary immigration, to look at the long story, the big picture of immigration. And it's set out like an airport, with a departures lounge, and we have different gates where you kind of explore the different motivations for people leaving. So there's loads of wonderful stories in that exhibition. And this is a picture I like, because this is just a group of young boys who came, on their way home from school, and they hang out in the shopping centre in the sort of central bit, which is where the entrance to our exhibition, to our museum is. And as is their wont, I now know, they rush into the museum. It's a thing they do. And they were sort of scooped up by our lovely front of house staff and brought to this exhibit, which is a an artistic response to something called the Raja Quilt, which was a quilt sewn by women transported, convicts, transported to, you know, what is now Tasmania in the 1800s. And that's now on display in a museum in Australia. But this is like a sort of mosaic. You can make the quilt and kind of play with it. And on each of the tiles is the name of the convict and the crime for which they were transported. And of course, you know, they get sort of 7 years transportation for a crime like stealing a loaf of bread or something. But it's quite intriguing, and I just love the fact that here are these sort of Southeast London schoolboys engaging with a bit of, you know, 19th century sort of emigration history. And the other exhibition, the other main one we've got, is called Room to Breathe, and it's, I mean, I think it's a lovely exhibition. It's unlike other exhibitions, I think. Normally you're told sort of not to touch things in a museum, but in this exhibition you're told to inhabit the spaces, open the drawers, sit in the chairs, pick up the ingredients, you know, actually kind of, you know, interact with the exhibition. So it's a series of recreated rooms through which we explore the experience of settling and moving in, you know, how people, you know, what people do to find their feet in a new country. And it's 150 stories or so, sort of woven into the exhibition in all sorts of imaginative ways. You know, stories of people you won't have heard of, but they're very sort of intimate and very engaging. So, you know, as I say, there's a kitchen table there. And that's a story, it's a wonderful animated projection of, actually it's a story about an Italian immigrant family who set up a sort of cafe in Oxford serving the quintessentially English sort of eggs and bacon. And in the bottom right, you can see you know, people sitting down in our recreated classroom, writing their memories of being at school in exercise books. I just wanted to play you a little bit of one of the kitchen projections, just to give you an idea of how immersive the exhibition is.
And I think no matter wherever you travel, you carry a bit of your roots in yourself. And I think food also brings the family together. So we're sitting as a family in England, far away from the monsoon rains back home and India. The whole joy of licking your fingers and the gloopy thing on your, you know, and the plate drying up when you finished your meal, but you still want to sit and talk as a family. All that adds to the romanticism of the food.
So that's just to show you what one of the exhibits in the kitchen by an animator called wonderful animator called Kate Anderson. Another thing we have on display is this lovely exhibit called Human Eye by a Brazilian photographer called Angelica Das. And she takes pictures of people and literally sets them against their Pantone paint color. And, you know, her aim is to document every skin color in the world. It's incredibly sort of arresting, and it's a real kind of point of conversation. And actually, Angelica came over and she ran a workshop. She lives in Spain now, where people came in and she taught them how to kind of make their own skin color using 4 colors. And it was just a lovely kind of interactive workshop where people could sit around on a Saturday morning in the middle of a shopping centre and do a self-portrait. We have a display about football. It's the Euros going on at the moment. England are doing rather well. It's all very sort of exciting for us. So this is a display. We've got our 2 big windows. This is Southeast London football heroes, and some of them are stellar names like Ian Wright, and some of them are just kind of local football heroes. But again, it's a real talking point in the shopping centre because people will take a selfie, you know, because there's a picture of their uncle up there. And this is accompanied by a much wider public engagement campaign where we look at what the England team would look like without players who have a parent or grandparent born abroad. And of course, I think this was the first match. You know, there are 3 players left. So this has been a kind of exciting, you know, quite a new departure for us to do this, actually. Another thing we have on display in the shopping centre is this rather lovely piece by artists called the Singh Twins, who we've worked with before, and they create these kind of rather, you know, sort of informative and intriguing pieces in the style of miniatures. And this is a COVID. This is a South Asian nurse, Astrida Charger, sort of battling the COVID dragon. And that's something we exhibit as part of our latest, or indeed our first, immersive digital exhibition, Heart of the Nation, which looks at migration and the making of the NHS, you know, how migrants have not only really contributed to the NHS, but really, really sort of make the NHS, and not just during the life of the NHS, but actually long before as well. And we got that up in the Piccadilly Circus lights just before Christmas last year, which was an exciting thing for us. Other exhibitions we've done in the past, and I guess this is, you know, more relevant to your wonderful Richard Mosse exhibit. This was something we did in 2016, and this was just before the EU referendum, when this story, the jungle refugee camp in Calais, was a front page news story, you know, every single day, and it was of the most kind of grisly and anonymizing variety. And our aim with this exhibition, we put it on in London, managed to put it together in about 6 weeks, was to sort of tell some of the human stories behind the anonymizing headlines. And we did that in a variety of ways. We had this lovely sculpture of all those people walking, and of course they all kind of look the same, but when you dig into them, in fact, they all actually look quite different. It was a real talking point, that. We had art, we had lots of photography, but we also had personal portraits. We had a display of life jackets. I think that's, perhaps you can't see that at the moment, but incredibly moving life jackets, which were children's life jackets, and some of them actually were life jackets filled with packaging material. They wouldn't even work, And these are the kind of life jackets that were given out to people who came from countries often where they hadn't even learned to swim. I mean, this is the sort of tragedy of some of these stories. So the aim was just to get behind these awful headlines and kind of humanize this story. So that was actually the first exhibition we ever put on, and it was a really exciting exhibition for us. Another exhibition we did, looking at the long story, we picked 7 moments in British migration history when something really sort of significant happened from a migration point of view. And it goes right back to this one, in this image in the middle is a contemporary illustration of the expulsion of the entire Jewish population in 1290, which is something a lot of people don't know about. So we picked, as I say, seven sort of critical dates, and each of them had a kind of current resonance, which is why they were interesting to explore. 100 Images of Migration is just a digital collection we have, crowdsourced. These are images that people have sent us that say something about migration. We think everyone has got an image they could send that says something about migration, and they're incredibly moving. This is in the middle at the bottom, there's Norma, who, a Windrush era immigrant with a little penny that her mother gave her and said, don't unwrap this until you get to England. And then top left, a rather kind of anodyne looking image, but it's actually the tears of the Huguenots, those little droplets in the crest of Wandsworth Borough Council. It's how the migration story has kind of woven itself into our municipal architecture. But, we've got hundreds of these. Interactivity and conversation is right at the core of everything that we do. We always ask our visitors to leave their contributions, and here this is in response to Angelica's Human Eye Pantone portraits. We ask them to ask the questions and actually answer other people's questions as well. So this is a conversation between visitors. But if we've learned nothing else, it's that people want to share their stories. They are impelled when they come to the museum. They really want to share their stories. And this is terribly simple. It's just, cardboard discs, your migration story. We've got tens of thousands of these. I mean, it really is a sort of outpouring of responses. And they, they're wonderful, moving stories. In 5 lines, people can tell you something really profound. So all our stories is our tagline. We think there's something in this museum for everybody, bar no one. As I think I've already alluded to, events, a lively program of events. I hope we get back to putting those on some stage soon. And this is just a story of, we work with artists in all of our exhibitions because we always want to kind of come at things from multiple angles, and art speaks to some people, statistics, people speak to other people. This is an artist who called Habib, who's an Afghan refugee now in Britain. But, at the top left, this is when he was in the jungle, and the jungle was a horrible place which was constantly being sort of demolished by the authorities because it wasn't an authorized camp and being burnt down. And this was him in this tent painting this picture, trying to kind of keep his head together in all the mayhem and misery that was going on around him. And he couldn't travel to Britain at that time, but his picture could, and we exhibited it in our exhibition, and he made a little model of the building that he's painting. It's a building in Afghanistan. And then he eventually did come over to Britain, and he eventually got refugee status. And we had him in one of our exhibitions as an artist in residence, where he would be making art on the theme of migration and engaging visitors to sit down with him, roll up their sleeves and make art with him. And we had a series of a number of artists doing that. And this is actually when the mayor, Sadiq Khan, the mayor of London, visited us. There he is sort of shaking the mayor's hand, having finally sort of got to Britain. And this is a wonderful model of the jungle refugee camp that he made out of it's papier-mâché, but also items like discarded tear gas canisters, and it's very sort of viscerally reminiscent of the camp. And then bottom right, we've here he is cooking an Afghan meal with a social enterprise called My Grateful that we work with, and we do lots of events with them where you learn, you buy a ticket and you learn to cook a meal. Taught, as it turns out, he's also a wonderful cook. You learn to cook, you cook a lovely Afghan meal, and then you all sit down and eat it together. So I suppose this is just an illustration of how, we've gone on this, really rather kind of lovely and rewarding journey with this particular artist, but there are other stories like that as well. So that's really where I wanted to end. So as I say, a whistle-stop tour. But any questions? Shall I stop sharing now, Anna?
Yeah, that's fine. And I'll just pose a few questions. So I want to give Hina some time to do her presentation. And I really encourage our viewers today to check out these exhibitions. They're wonderfully informative on your website, because you really get a lot out of that experience. And I see that most of the exhibitions are thematic in nature, Sophie. I wonder, do you ever host solo exhibitions by artists, or is that something for the future?
I think that probably is something for the future. I mean, we've been very constrained actually by space. We're a pop-up. We're nomadic. We adjust to what places are available for us. So actually, we haven't really had space to do that. But so solo exhibitions, not really. But as I say, we did have these artists in residence. Actually, in a former incarnation of the Room to Breathe exhibition, we had a series. We did a call out for artists with migrant and refugee backgrounds to occupy the space for a month at a time and create their own art. And that was just a lovely kind of interactive thing. And one of them was the artist I've just told you about. But so we had a show at the end of that exhibition, which was like a curated, one of the artists kind of curated like a group show of the things that they'd done. And one of those artists actually has now gone on to receive a major commission at the Imperial War Museum. He's called Georges Salé. And he again does absolutely beautiful miniature style paintings that reflect sort of migration, his story, refugee crisis more broadly. He's a refugee from Iraqi Kurdistan, but it's been really sort of really kind of important for us to, I think, provided a platform for him, and we have an ongoing relationship with him. So we don't, as a rule, do that, but all of our exhibitions, as I've said, are absolutely multimedia. So we always have artistic responses to the items that we to the themes that we're exploring.
Yeah, and how is the ambition progressing for the new space?
It'll happen. All I can say is that many conversations are ongoing. Quite promising conversations. I think what we need is to find a property developer who wants to, a cultural use like us in the middle of a development. We want a local authority who wants to have us in their area, and I think we've got a really powerful place-making offer, and I think really all the more so now that shopping centres and city centres, are suffering in many ways. So it's going to happen, and lots of conversations are ongoing. And we came actually very close to a home in the London Borough of Southwark who are keen to have us in the borough a few years ago. And at the last minute, that scheme didn't get planning consent because the building was too high, so it fell through. But we worked up our sort of, our business plan and our kind of operational model. So we're kind of ready to go with the next one that comes along. And there are a few promising conversations that we are having. But right. For the short term, I hope we're going to be in Lewisham Shopping Centre for the next year's Lewisham is Borough of Culture. So that'll be a great year to be there. Yeah. And I hope for maybe a couple of years beyond that. But after that, I would hope we will find our permanent home.
And importantly, has the reality of Brexit and the heightened pressure of nationalism added to an even greater social relevance of the role of the Migration Museum in England today?
I mean, absolutely. I really do think the rationale has never been stronger. I think when people are, potentially liable, in uncertain times to sort of, retreat into the kind of nationalism that talks about, real Britons or real Americans, or, I think it's important. I think it's important to counter those narratives. I think, Britain is a country that has been built, on migration, but Britain has been, shaped by migration. The institutions that we sort of hold most dear, like the National Health Service, for example. A quarter of employees of the National Health Service are born abroad or are of minority ethnic heritage, and that rises to 30% of nurses and 50% of doctors. And you look at the armed forces, a third of the armed forces in both world wars born abroad. Look at the football team. Look at the things that Britain holds dear, that are the sort of national icons, and actually, they're stories of migration. So I think I would say absolutely, now more than ever before, when people are liable, to take. I think, overall attitudes, I would say, towards migration have actually softened in the last 30 or 40 years. But what's increased is polarization and noise, and people who have kind of noisy and extreme views tend to dominate the debate. So that's what you hear. Most people aren't in that space. Most people are in the middle. Most people are kind of moderate and interested. And I think what we can provide is a kind of, a beautiful, engaging, enjoyable, stimulating place where people can come and sort of calmly reflect and think and make some sense, actually, of the noise that's around them. So I would say never before has the rationale been greater. Yeah. And, in response to Black Lives Matter as well, there's an absolute outpouring of demand for more and better teaching about Black history and about our colonial past. There's just a huge demand for people who want to know more. So I would say absolutely the museum's time has come.
That's great. And I mean, I really love that poster at the football at this time, because it's very accessible, a way for people to, to reach out to. I mean, as you say, education and interactivity is at the core of what you do at the museum. And I see that you have a really far-reaching digital program. Have these programs helped you reach wider audience that might not completely be comfortable with the art making, as such?
Yeah. I think absolutely. I mean, it's early days with the football campaign because we've never actually done anything on this scale before, but manifestly it's reaching new audiences for us. So, we know who our self-selecting core audience is, and it tends to be an audience who, are sort of young, highly educated, sort of interested in migration already. And it's very important for us actually not to talk to people who already, think that the migration story is interesting, but to get beyond that. And I think with the football, it's already reached more than 2 million people on social media. And I think, depending on what happens tonight and further on, it's going to go a lot further. But we're reaching very different audiences. Male audiences, which are underrepresented in our general audiences, actually, older. I think, although we need to do more work on analysing the audiences, but people who probably think that, or may well think that the migration story isn't, necessarily sort of relevant to them. So that's been really important, I think, to extend our reach digitally. But also in the shopping centre, we're getting people. We are, in fact, the people who are coming in, 90% of them are passers-by. They're people who have set out to do their shopping, not to come to a museum. And this is something really exciting for us.
There's something to be said about placing a museum in a shopping centre. I mean, I know the ceilings are low and all that, but the space is actually, when looking at the images online on your website, I mean, the shows look terrific. So it means that accessibility is a terrific form of bringing people in.
I think, I absolutely, and you're right. It is beautiful actually. When you take all the kind of clothes and the rails and everything out of a great big sort of superstar, and it looks fabulous. It looks like the White Cube Gallery. It looks, it really does. And we've made quite interesting use of things like the cubicles. We've got little listening booths in the change. So we've got some kind of fun things as well. But absolutely reaching people who who wouldn't necessarily think that a museum was the kind of place that would be welcoming for them. So I think being accessible in that way has been a really exciting discovery for us, and it's something we want to build on.
And you have a big staff. Is your funding a combination of public and private funds? And I also see that you've got a very impressive membership of distinguished friends.
Yeah.
Do they contribute to the cost of the running of your programming? Or
some of them do. You say we have a big staff. I always think we have a tiny staff. There may be more people on our website than truly reflects. We have a core staff of 9 people. So actually, given what we do, we're stretched pretty thin. And we have lots of volunteers who help us as well, and our distinguished friends. Yes, we've got, I think we're up to 140 distinguished friends who are sort of eminent people from all walks of life and across the political spectrum, which is important, who like the idea of the museum. And some of them are more engaged with others. Some of them do support us financially. It's a fantastic resource, actually, our distinguished friends, because it's a great sort of breadth of expertise. Occasionally funding, but largely just kind of expertise, connections.
And you turn to them for advice, yeah?
Exactly right. It's like a large and sort of friendly sounding board for the museum.
Listen, I want to talk about Richard Mosse's show in a response to that, but I think let's move on to have Hina do her presentation, and we can come back, the three of us, and have a general chat about incoming or related questions. So thank you very much, Sophie. That was really interesting. And Hina, let's fire away with your presentation, and then we can have I'll ask you a couple of questions afterwards. Then, thanks so much.
Okay, thanks for having me. My name is Hina. I'm living in Ireland since, do you hear me?
Yes.
I'm living in Ireland since 2015. And I'm working I'm trained as a miniature painter, but I'm developing, most of my work is contemporary, and I'm developing my own visual vocabulary. This is my thesis painting I have developed during my, when I finished my master's from Pakistan in 2003. And this is all about the male dominance, and it's all about how we dividing the women's in the society. Some prostitutes and some common women, like it is a very suppressed kind of for women, especially like when men are dealing with the women's and they are just care for their four relations, like daughter, wife, mother, and a sister, but they are not care about the other, they are not having a much respect about the other females. So like, I'm just thinking like, why men are dividing these areas, why female are not allowed to go to red light area. So my research is based on about the red light area and socially accepted women. They are both are treated by the men. Patriarchy system is very strong over there. So at that time, I create this. This is a 3x9 long size of miniature painting, and I created this piece during my thesis time. Traditional miniature painting is like we have to practice a very traditional things, and we need to learn all the replicas and traditional borders and jadwals and everything. It's a very meditative technique. But what I am thinking, like I am developing the work during the like I am always breaking the boundaries, and I always think the new ways. Like I learned the technique, I made a lot of replicas, but I'm always thinking like how I can develop my own visual vocabulary. So you can see like my thesis painting is totally different, and I use the motifs and shapes and forms in a very symbolic way. And that's how I try to build up in my paintings. This painting is elevator, and like I use the jadwal and borders in a very traditional way, but I break the boundaries, and I finished this painting here in Ireland. And I feel like this painting is elevated, and I really feel like to go towards the sky through the ladder. So like I'm always trying to break the boundaries and trying to create my own visual vocabulary. This is the painting Ruined Garden. It is in a permanent collection of Arts Council Ireland now. And this is all about the child killing, child abuse. 134 during the APS Army Public School incident. So at that time, I feel very connected because I really, it is really a tragic thing for everybody. So I really try to paint in a very, the poppy flowers are representing the symbols of the children, like which are in the school, and they saw the teachers are burnt in front of those children. So like it is very difficult for me to like absorb these kind of things. This is again the extension of this ruined garden. I made this 4 series of the ruined gardens on that incident. This work I have developed in Ireland while I'm doing a short course in NCAD in the evening classes. So this is an acrylic painting. This is again in a permanent collection of Arts Council Ireland. This is Shattered Soul. I have my first solo show. I was asked to display my work in Berlin Arts Center, and that is the whole show about visible and invisible. During living in DPC, I was very close to voluntarily work with the refugee artists, not refugee artists, refugee people who are just directly coming from the war. So I produced these Anthropocene Gardens. These are 12 painting of series. I just presented here one. but it is a 12 gardens which I made. Like when I was a child, I feel like everything is very peaceful and calm. And now where we can, like when we are hearing the news, like something happened here, something happened a different part of the world, like lost and things like that. And people who are coming from the war, I really feel their trauma on their faces. Some children, they don't speak English, they don't like, they are very scared about the things. This work, scroll work, I have prepared in during the residency, and it is part of my solo show as well. My show it's like it was all about the steps of migration and people who are migrated, what suffering they are feeling. You, when you go closer, it is definitely, I use the miniature technique, so it is, these are the footsteps of the people. And I prepared it in a very contemporary way. There is some visual vocabulary I used, like these images. We are using these patterns while we are making in miniature the water. So there is some floating bodies of the children, like at the Syrian wartime, I think people are crossing the border, and there is a floating body of the children. So that make me really, I really made this painting on that time, like children, adult age, and like older people, all are affected by the war, and it never goes from the mind. It will stay with the people's mind. It will not very easy to absorb these things. The roots is the painting started last year when I did a residency in Ellen Westcock Art Center. And like I started this work, it is connection between 1947 when the colonial system is and the Britishers are coming from back from Pakistan and India, and they divided without any like, they divided India and Pakistan, and still we have a very harsh border, and people are really, the borders are really, really harsh even still now. So my grandparents are migrated, so I'm just connecting. So somehow those migration, because it is the biggest migration, 15 million people were displaced on that time. So this is I developed just, it is not finished yet, but I developed it last year because I'm researching on migration, and I'm connecting it on my migration as well. So this is Untitled Painting I have created last year. These are my drawings of Irish clouds.
Lots of them.
During the DPC, I create these drawings. This is again the relationship and the story of a woman, how women are tied up with the threads, and they are broken sometimes with the relationships, and but they are compiling their self. It is during the COVID time last year, I did a residency at Ellen, and I produced this massive installation about COVID, how COVID affect all of us. And like we are watching on the television, it started from Wuhan and it take over all over the world. And like how, like we are watching it very in a very, like we are thinking what happened in China, and it grasped everyone. So when there is a break, like they open up restrictions, they end up restrictions. So I went to the residency and I developed this work.
It's terrific.
This work I have developed in the DPC because I feel very suffocated, and Anita Groner was the curator of this show. It was displayed in Grange Common in Dublin. This is again last year I have participated in Asia Art and Activism, and I made a video work. This is actually a video work, and this is my drawings for the people who feel suffocated, and they are died. 39 people, Vietnamese people, are died in a lorry incident, and they are trying to move the borders. And I think like they are all died, and we are just representing and the grief in that way. Like 39 artists from all over the world present their pieces. So this piece is part of that. This is Blind Alley, and this is while I was living in DPC, I really feel to open up the ways. But yeah, this is a very deep. My work is like gradually it is changing and it's evolving through the installation, through the some of my pieces are going to be transformed into digital work. I'm collaborating with different filmmakers, different artists. Like the work you see behind it is with the Polish artist. I'm working with Mother Tongue Festival, Smashing Times, like different people and different, my work is evolved through like these 6 years journey, is like evolving. I'm experimenting with size. Miniature is a very small kind of, you can sit anywhere and you can produce the work. But like whenever I got a big studio and big places, I really experimenting with the large sizes because I'm highly inspired by some of artists who produce a very large work. Currently, like Anson Kiefer's work is really appeal me. So like whenever I got a chance and to display my work in a large way, so I can do that. This is all the work I have produced. Some of new work is like I'm producing World Without Borders and Imaginative Maps. It will come up next year during my show in Cork Gallery. And I'm just researching and completing my visual things, and these are the huge paintings I'm preparing. But I am thinking about the world in a different direction. I'm just thinking we are all belongs to Adam, and we are all like think in a different direction. World Without Borders is a very imaginative kind of thing, but I'm really trying to convey a new message through my work.
That's terrific, Hina, and it's wonderful to see such an array of work, because I hadn't seen all of that online, and I was just trying to seek out information on your work. So it really has progressed hugely on from miniatures, and I love the miniatures, but the installations are all encompassing as well and very immersive, and must be freeing for you to have space to be able to do this kind of work. And you know, your work has addressed many social issues around migration. Do those issues continue to be the most important source of inspiration, or as you say, have things grown on further?
Actually, like displacement is not easy. Sometimes it's forced by the situation. Sometimes it's like it's not easy thing. You are connect from the memory. Even I'm doing research and working with the children who are living in DPC and people. It's a project of create, like we are developing a research how people can connect through their lands, through the memories. So we are creating some mud installation, and like we are taking the steps and on the, like we are using the material with the clay, and people are feel very connected through that medium as well. So like yes, it is not the main thing like I'm working on, because whatever strongly clicked me, like I produce a work on COVID as well. Like I connect with a lot of artists, and I ask to them like what they feel. Even one of my friend living in New York, and she told me about like she have the same feeling like we are living here in Ireland. We face the same, and my family living in Pakistan, they face the same things. So I think there is a connection between how we all go through with these things. So like yes, like whatever attract me as an artist and whatever makes me disturbed. So I really want to portray.
That's great. Your volume is going in and out a bit, the problem we talked about earlier. So if you could just keep yourself directed at your microphone, because it is difficult to hear you. It kind of cuts out a little bit, but we're getting the gist of what you're saying. So thank you. Amazingly, you were able to make art indirect whilst in direct provision here in Ireland in 2015. Was that a tough experience? And did you ever come across any other artists whilst in these centres?
Yeah, it was tough experience. But during that time period, like I met some Irish artists. They guide me and they told me like how I can apply for the things. I don't know what is the process, but there is Mary Smith, Lucy Hill, and I'm especially thanks to the Mayo artists. They really helped me how I can develop my work, and how, like they said, like you must show your work to the people. It is very important. So like intercultural officer and our county council arts officer, she came and visit me. I know it was a very difficult time to go to Castlebar from Ballyhonnes, but she came and visit and saw my work, and like she guided me how I can develop and how I can, and she said to me like, don't stop working.
I'm glad to hear that. So in general, you feel the Irish art world has been supportive of you and your work?
Yeah, definitely. Like Patrick Murphy selected my artwork. He was the curator, and Catherine Marshall was the curator. So it gave me a good kind of feeling, like I can, because somehow I feel my art is misfit with this art scene. Like in a group shows, I feel like, but they select my work. And they have the problem like how they can mix it up, because Western art and Eastern art have a difference. Like if you can go see the Chester Beatty Museum, and like there is a lot of different work. So, but that's how people can accommodate my work. I got acceptance first solo show in Ireland,
Sure.
and then my show travels to County Laois as well, and so it's a good thing.
Kind of off the wall question, but having lived in Ireland now for 6 years, I'm wondering, has Irish culture found its way into your work in any way? Not that it necessarily has to, but I'm just curious, are you looking to that at all? You've got so much source material yourself, you don't need to, but I just wondered if there's some way, and maybe it's the way of making work, or the freedom of having space that's changing things, but perhaps not Irish culture as such.
Actually, your voice is gone during the question.
Sorry, it was just sort of saying, you know, if Irish culture has come into the work at all, not that it needs to, but you have so much resources in your own work. Has that had played any part in new work?
Yeah, because I went to National College of Art and Design in the evening courses, but all like whenever I try to make things like the piece I show you, it is giving me some bit of influence of, like I tried the acrylic paints in a different way, but mainly my medium is miniature painting and the opaque watercolors. It has a very meditative process, but I'm trying different mediums and experimenting with the size and mediums and everything. Yeah.
And I think I mentioned to you, I wondered if you had, if you've seen the work of Shazia Sikander, who is based in New York, and she's sort of celebrated for
Shazia Sikander.
Yeah, she's sort of celebrated for expanding and subverting pre-modern and classical Central and South Asian miniature painting traditions, and launching a form known today as neo-miniature. I just wondered what you thought of her work, and is she someone you admire or not?
Yeah, like Shazia Sikander is one of the pioneer who started new miniature, and they give a new direction, because the old masters like Bashir Saab is really strict with, though the practice and techniques are really essential, but like he is really strict with the borders and boundaries. But Shazia Sikander bring a new thing into the miniature painting, and she bring the new scroll painting, and she added different layers in a different direction in a contemporary way. So like people really, the whole world is admiring her work, and she's, I really, she's an inspiration for me as well. I really like her work.
That's good. Just one quick last question.
The new.
Oh, very good. Thank you, Hina. Just a quick question before we open this up a little bit to ourselves. Is there a strong Pakistani community in Ireland, and have you been in touch with them, or not?
Yeah, there is a lot of doctors. There is a lot of people, artists, and like one or two artists are studying or working, and like the other people are living. We don't have a lot in Kinsale, like 2-3 families, but there is a lot of good community in Cork and in Dublin, everywhere. Like you can see the Asian people.
That's great. So are you loving living in Kinsale, which is a beautiful part of the country by the sea?
Yeah, like I got a good studio here, and I'm developing a lot of work, and there is a lot of good friends here in Kinsale. So like they are very supportive in the way, like, it is I think it is a relationship in between both sides.
That's great.
They are very good, and like I'm trying to be.
That's great. That's great. I'm glad to hear that. Well, listen, I'm just going to open up just one or two, because we don't have a lot of time left, but I'm interested. I don't know, Hina, if you are familiar at all with Richard Mosse's work, but Sophie may have seen something in I don't know, Sophie, if you got to see Incoming at the Barbican when it opened there.
I did.
You did.
Yeah.
And
It was 10 years ago.
I'm just going to send out that this sort of, Richard has gained, a huge accolades worldwide for his work. But there is a contingent of the art viewing public that take issue with the fact that he's a white man making art about brown people or people of color, much of the time without their direct consent, although he does get consent, and I can tell you more about that. So some audiences, find his work exploitative, and I just want to know, what do you think about, or what's your experience of knowing about white artists making work that bring tough issues of our times or the suffering of others to our attention? Do you think that's good enough that he's bringing this work to people's attention or reminding them of these big issues? Or is this anything that, what's your thoughts on that? I'd love to know from both of you. So,
shall I go first?
Yes, why don't
I mean, I'm no authority on this. I mean, for me, Richard Mosse's work was just incredibly powerful. And I suppose that was the thing that, that really struck me. That I suppose I felt he was setting out to do what we were trying to do with our exhibition out at the Jungle Camp, which was to sort of somehow humanize story. And it's such a difficult thing to do, because I think, I think it was probably back in 2016 or 2017 when he made that film.
Yeah, 17.
It was such a dehumanizing story. It was also, there was a real risk that people, I think, were just sort of inured to it, because these images just became so familiar that you couldn't really sort of dredge up an emotional response anymore. So I think there is real value in just having, the fact that his take was so different. It was so refreshing. It was so interesting that he was subverting this kind of, military technology to do something completely different. And, he was actually literally getting under the skin of people. I mean, you could almost sort of see the blood. I mean, I can't really remember it, but I do remember being very sort of overawed by it. So, for me, if you're achieving that, if you're making, we often try to achieve surprise, not in a kind of, not in a cheap way, but because it kind of it makes people think. If you tell them something that's counterintuitive or they haven't expected, it just kind of makes them look at an old or familiar problem or issue in a new way. And I think for me, he achieved that. But I can understand, so for me, that's valuable. That's about, it's a shocking thing, this refugee crisis. And actually, if you can make some people wake up to it in a different way, that seems to me a good thing. But I do understand the issue of agency and and I suppose it could be seen to be rather voyeuristic to be looking at people from a long way away, and you can't really have their consent for everything. And this is something we struggled with our Calais exhibition as well. And I think we got round that because a lot of it was in people, the refugees' own words, because they manifestly were giving consent because we were exhibiting their art, for example, and they wrote the captions, and we had their voices, and so it felt like it was very much by the people in the camp as well as about them. So I can see where the criticisms are coming from, but for me, he's doing something bigger, and that's just very powerful.
That's good to hear. I mean, we're trying through our learning program to invite our migrant community into the museum and have programs and talks and an exhibition similar to the one that you did of keepsakes, where people are bringing things from their migrants are bringing in objects from their home or that have a big importance to them, and we're photographing them and displaying them with a panel, a statement from them. Just again, a way of opening that up. But Hina, I'd love to hear your response to that. Have you engaged at all in Richard Mosse's work, or what do you think about white people making work about issues of or places of struggle or migration as a whole?
Yeah, like this is a very big issue, and the last week I was in a forum of Facebook and during the time of World Refugee Week, and Anita Groner's work is a similar kind of work, but which is it resembles somehow with the Mosse's work as well. So it will create, she adds some of her picture and her family picture, and it will create similar kind of imagery, and we cannot categorize who is crossing the border and who is there, and we cannot categorize them, and it is the issue which is really, really taking people's lives. Like people are, sometimes people are crossing the border and they are died. It's similar like when they are crossing the border by water, they pay a lot of money to agents and different things, but they died in the way. Like I did develop a work about the 39 people who are died in the lorry. So these kind of things, like it is resonating with all the dialogues about the migration and the people who are crossing, and this should be highlighted in the way like my whole work, the next work is all about like why the rigid border, how we make the borders, why we create the discrimination, how we are going into the circles of the boundaries, when we will break the boundaries, and what will happen with like this is in my perception, like I think it is the issue which come in front of the people. It is not just a matter of the life and death of the few people, it's a matter of human beings.
Yeah. It's great to hear that you're addressing that work yourself, and be very curious to see what you do in the future along those lines. I don't know, Alan, if we have any questions that you received.
Yes, absolutely. And we have just a few to finish up on. And the first one really comes from Rosalind, who asks, she's found that what can museums and galleries do to really kind of combat this idea that migrants and people, be they even first or second generation, are taking people's jobs, and that they're, you know, that migrants are benefit scroungers? Is there something that museums and galleries can do as public services to combat that amongst the general population? She wonders, I suppose it's the role, very much about the topic of our conversation today. And she, I suppose, Sophie, that's kind of aimed at you and Anna.
Yeah. Well, that is a, you know, that's an illogical thing that people say, isn't it? That that migrants are, you know, taking jobs, you know, and are scroungers. I think, you know, I think what we can do is, I mean, this is the rationale for the Migration Museum, really. I think is that, you know, it's making a sort of public statement that this is a, you know, a story and a contribution that is valued by the nation. So it's not sort of tacked on to another, you know, to other institutions. It actually is the main story. I think that actually symbolically is a very, very powerful thing that ought to happen. You know, I think people are persuaded by public narratives to some extent, and that's really, I think, a very strong argument for having a dedicated museum that shows, you know, it's not all a positive story. I mean, you know, migration is if nothing else really, really complicated. I mean, I think it's a positive story, but I mean, it's, you know, other people, for them it's not a positive story, but that's fine. I think it's really important to say, you know, whether you like it or not, this is part of Britain's story, and this isn't a story we're going to explore in a kind of calm and civilized and sort of, you know, inspiring, kind of stimulating way. So I think, you know, making a sort of public statement that this is, you know, on any view, a really important part of the national story is something we can do. And I think the other thing we can do is not to be sort of, I mean, maybe that I am sounding a bit too messagey about this. I don't think the museum should be messagey. It shouldn't be telling people what to be thinking, to be thinking. It should be saying, you know, this is, you know, here are some interesting aspects about British history. You know, what do you think? It should be asking questions. You know, that's much more interesting. And it's, you know, it's a little bit, it's in fact extremely patronizing, I think, to try and tell people what they should be thinking. And obviously people are going to disagree. I think what we want to do is live together well on the topic of migration. And if we need to disagree well. But a museum, you know, what museums can do, they're civic places, and I think they can be forums for debate, but, you know, you've got to make them accessible. So it's a really good idea, I think, to be in a shopping centre. I think it's a really good idea to go onto people's phones. You know, if people are looking at football scores on their smartphones, you know, have the conversation on, start the conversation where people are already, and so they're not feeling sort of dragged into something they don't want to be part of. You know, start the conversation like that. Start them having a conversation about the food they eat. You know, you know, and I think you can, in sort of subtle and enjoyable ways, you know, you can actually get people to look at what they might view as a problem or a difficulty in a slightly different way. But what you really want to do is get people not shouting but talking.
Not shouting, but talking. Yes, I think that sums it up. And then maybe, Hina, a question just lastly for you. There's been a kind of a question. How do you feel about it? It's linked slightly to the last question. How do you feel about being approached by museums and galleries to talk about these issues and display work connected to migration? It's an agency issue. Do you feel somehow disempowered as the lone artist against cultural institutions? Or is it a positive thing? Do you find it, it's not at all scary? What's your take on that?
Uh, like I don't like, as a human being, things are really make me disturbed with the very like sometimes these issues are not very small. These are very deep, and whenever I go deeper, like it open up a new ways of thinking, and like it is all interconnected. I'm doing all the research and developing all the work. It's not easy to go through with these situations and develop a work in that way, but I think these are the major things present in the society. And some people are really hate about it, and some people are really don't talk about it. But you know, the migration is a start from Adam, while God sent them from Jannah to the earth. And I'm just thinking about the earth. I'm not thinking about the negative thoughts and the negative people, but I'm really optimistic and positive about all these things. Like I really want to talk about these things because I saw some Afghan refugees. I saw some people who are really scared about all these things. So I cannot stop my voice to work about these things.
Yeah.
I really want to develop on the paper or develop on the walls or develop everywhere, like develop it, and I will go through with this situation. But I really, whenever I go towards the lens of the like colonialism and the different things, like it open up the new things for me. And though it's disturbing, it's not easy to make the painting on these things. You are go through with these things emotionally as well. So. Yeah.
Of course. And just before I hand back to Anna to wind up, just to say, as I mentioned at the start of the conversation, this is the first of two. The next talk, just to flag it for those of you who would be interested to book and come along, in 2 weeks' time on the 21st of this month, we will have What Statistics Don't Tell Us. And it's very much a continuation of this conversation, looking at. Today we looked at the role of museums and galleries, but on the 21st it will be looking at the role of media and journalism. And we will have Fiona Lachnan from NCAD in conversation with Tom Fell, the head of journalism at NUI Galway, and Nick Henderson, the CEO of the Irish Refugee Council. So just to flag that up for you as a continuation of the talk series. And as Anna mentioned, next week, the Butler Gallery, we will open our Stories Through Objects exhibition, which is the gallery reaching out to its local migrant communities through Kilkenny and the wider region. And so it'll be online, on site at the gallery. So if you can, do log on or come to see it in person if you can at the gallery itself. We'd be delighted to let you come and see these people's stories from themselves, kind of as Sophie and Hina have both said today, putting people at the heart of the story is really important. And so we kind of really would like to celebrate that. So Anna, I think I would hand back to you as our time has run out.
Well, thank you, Alan, and thank you very much for this, really great programming that you've put together during this Richard Mosse exhibition, and highlighting issues that we're all have lots to talk about, and we kind of just touched the surface here today. But I really appreciate, Hina, you sharing your work. I love the way it's going. I wish you the very best with the show in Kinsale, and I hope I get to see it in person sometime soon. And Sophie, thank you so much for illuminating the ideas and what you're achieving at the Migrant Museum. There's so many great exhibitions there. I'm really impressed, and I really hope you get a home of your own. We were involved with a capital development for 15 years here, trying to find a home of our own, which we just moved into last August. So it's hard won, but it is really terrific when that happens. But I think you're doing great work where you are, and thank you all for your input today. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sign off for now, and thank you very much, everyone, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.